Well, I hope that this afternoon we can wrap up our discussion of Descartes. We've come far enough in Descartes to see that plainly he is not an empiricist, but a rationalist. There is a priori knowledge independent of experience. In fact, his classic example of that was his discussion of a piece of wax whose empirical properties are subject to change. But the wax as an object of thought, the concept of the wax, remains. Now, I want to start, therefore, with that notion of a thought object, not a sense object, but a thought object. Plainly, Descartes is maintaining that we have other kinds of ideas than particular sensory ideas, particular empirical data. We also have concepts. I think he would agree, universal, abstract concepts. And he wants to maintain that these concepts, these thought objects, have a kind of reality of their own, so that certain things are universally true of certain thought objects. They have an objectivity of their own. And it's in that context that he's able to distinguish in these last two meditations between the essence of material bodies, that is to say, the concept of matter, the essence, which you conceptualize, of matter, and the existence of material bodies that you perceive with your senses. So his approach to meditation 5 is in terms of concepts, thought objects, whereas his approach in meditation 6 is in terms of perception, of sensory objects. And let's keep that distinction clear. If you were at the Dallas Willard lectures a couple of weeks ago, you remember that he made that distinction by rejecting the kind of theory of knowledge that he called sensism, as if the only knowledge we have is knowledge through our senses, which would be obviously an awareness of sensory particulars, empirical data. And what Willard did instead was to talk of certain objective, real meanings, which have an existence of their own sort, once they become part of the currency of thought, the objectivity of meanings. And this is the sort of thing with which Descartes would heartily agree, because the meaning of a word like matter becomes an objective thing. Matter has a real nature, an essence that we can conceptualize. And so he's talking in that sense of thought objects that can be universally understood in a common way. There are other examples of the same thing. Go back to Aristotle and his discussion of the laws of logic. The laws of logic are objective. They have a reality of their own, as structures of all thought and all meaningful discourse. You see, the rules of logic are objectively real. Not in the sense that they're physical, material things, no, though they're true of material things. Boys will be boys is a nice way of putting the law of identity. A rose is a rose. Yeah, that may be a poetic idiom. It may be a logical truism, but it's objectively true. You say anything that has the logical form of the laws of thought is bound to be objectively true, necessarily true. And at least one of the concepts that he deals with in Meditation 5, namely the concept of God, he deals with in terms of the objective reality of the laws of logic. In fact, I think that's true of matter as well. Because what he's trying to show in Meditation 5 with regards to the idea of matter and the idea of God is that there are certain logically necessary truths which we can know independently of experience about matter and about God. Now, I said independently of experience because he's a rationalist, not an empiricist. And his rationalism comes out here again. Yes. Logically necessary. Yeah. Their contradiction is impossible. Now, in order to see that, keep in mind that it's the essence of material bodies. Keep in mind the distinction which has already emerged in Hobbes, and it was evident in the science of the day, between primary and secondary qualities of physical bodies, where secondary qualities have to do with what's accessible only by virtue of our 5 senses, colour, smell, so forth. Whereas the primary qualities are qualities of material things themselves. They are of the very essence of matter. Now, you know what those primary properties were. Size, shape, density. Yeah, we call them spatial properties. Because the essence of matter is that it occupies space. So the essence of matter is that it has spatial properties. And if we can know any necessary truths about space, logically necessary truths about space, we know logically necessary truths about any possible matter, material body, spatial occupant. Now, what is the science that tells us what is logically necessary about space? Geometry, precisely. And so what he is trying to do is to show that there are logically necessary geometrical truths. And the example he takes is the simple one from plane geometry. He's not dealing with solid geometry in the example, but obviously he could. It would be a better example in a way if we're dealing with solidity, you see. But his example is from plane geometry, simply the idea of a triangle. There are certain necessary truths about any possible triangle. Necessary truths. It is necessarily true that a triangle has three angles. It's necessarily true that the three angles of a triangle, at least in Euclidean geometry, add up to 180 degrees, two right angles. And so we can know a priori, independently of any sense observations, granted the concept of matter as the object of our thought, matter as spatial occupancy, we can know certain necessary truths about the essence of matter. Okay? Now that's straightforward. And he deals with it at some length here. Actually, what he is saying is that the science of physics, in certain regards, can be done as not an empirical science, but an a priori science. And indeed, if you are thinking of branches of physics that were dominant in his day, like optics, then optics can be done a priori simply by figuring out angles of refraction and so forth, which optometrists do to this day. You see. Don't try to go into optometry if you don't like geometry. So then, the essence of matter comes out, and of course the science of his day was Newtonian, at least was going to be Newtonian. It was in the process of becoming that, because Newton was not yet. God says later on, let Newton be, it all becomes light. Not yet, you see. But that is the kind of physics that he's dealing with. He has, in other words, a mechanistic view of material bodies, including the operation of human bodies. Matter, causal forces that produce changes in human bodies. Okay? Now, in Meditation 5, he seems to spend, however, relatively less time on the essence of matter than he does on the idea of God. But the concept of God is another concept. God is not an object of sense observation. But the concept of God is something which is thought, not as a generalization from sense observations, but thought in the abstract, in that sense. And in Meditation 3, we've seen he's already been dealing with the concept of God. The concept of God as perfect being. Now, here in Meditation 5, his interest is in the concept of God again, but in the question of God's existence. Now, you might say, why that if he's talking about the essence of material bodies? Why swing over to talking about existence? And assuming you've been following all through Middle Ages, you can see immediately that the medieval conception of God is of one whose essence is to exist. You see. So then, if it is the case that God is one for whom his essence is indeed his existence, his essence is to exist, he is the very essence of existence, not just the existence of another form, another essence, but the very essence of existence, then there is a parallel between the necessary truths about material bodies that we know in geometry and the necessary truth of God's existence. Existence is to the concept of God, as adding up to two right angles is the concept of the three angles of a triangle. You see? Granted the concept of a triangle, it is a necessary truth. The contradiction would be self-contradictory. And granted the concept of God, the contradiction of his existence would be self-contradictory. Now you see, that's what he's after. And so what he develops in this fifth meditation is an ontological argument for the existence of God. An argument just from the idea. Now, look, if you will, then, at page 51, where he puts it this way, very top of the first column. When I think of it more attentively, it appears that the existence can no more be separated from the essence of God than the idea of a mountain from that of a valley, or the equality of three angles to two right angles from the essence of a triangle. So that it's not less impossible to conceive a God, that is, a being supremely perfect to whom existence is wanting, or who is devoid of a certain perfection, than to conceive a mountain without a valley. That latter is impossible. So is the conception of a God, perfect being who does not exist. Now, you catch echoes of Anselm, you see? Anselm with his view that God is the highest of all beings, therefore does exist. But there's an interesting point that he makes here in the second column of 51. It must be alleged as an objection, nor must it be alleged as an objection, that it's necessary to admit that God exists after having supposed him to possess all perfections, since existence is one of them. But my original supposition was not necessary. No, that doesn't follow. The objection just doesn't hold. His point is that existence is not just one more perfection. It is the very essence of the divine being. And if his essence is to exist, then God would not be God otherwise. And so, accordingly, the idea of a perfect being. Now, the logical form of the argument, I think, is pretty plain. He's arguing that either God exists or God does not exist. That is to say, either A or non-A. Okay? He argues that non-A is a self-contradictory position, therefore false. So A is necessarily true. Okay. The self-contradiction is in saying that one whose essence is to exist can not exist. You cannot conceive of a non-existent being whose essence is to exist. If you conceive the essence, he necessarily exists. Well, that caps off what Descartes' wanting to do concerning the relationship of God to human thought, so that he has this final paragraph in Meditation 5. I clearly see the certitude and truth of all science that's all theoretical thought, depends on the knowledge alone of the true God, inasmuch as before I knew him I could have no perfect knowledge of any other thing. But now that I know him, and I possess the means of acquiring perfect knowledge, as well relative to God as to other intellectual objects as to corporeal nature, insofar as it's the object of pure mathematics. The existence of God, a perfect being who would not deceive, gives confidence in necessary truths, in logically necessary truths. So what is logically necessary, not only about God, but about material bodies, could be accepted without doubt. And that's meditation 5. Comments? Yeah. Yeah, Kristen.
Is it a logical argument against Descartes to say, well, you could say that, I can say the words, that the right angle or the angle of the triangle adds to 150 degrees. But
How many?
150 degrees. It doesn't make the same true.
Right, right.
So couldn't you say the same thing about, well, I can come up with a definition, but that doesn't.
But you see, the geometry doesn't work at 150 degrees.
Right, but you can still make that statement. So.
Oh, yeah, but he's not talking about a statement, is he? Isn't he talking about a concept, the concept of a triangle? Now, analyze the concept of a triangle geometrically, which means logically.
Okay.
You see? So there's a logical necessity about a triangle that it be a triangle. And a triangle whose angles only add up to 150 degrees wouldn't be a triangle. You see? What you would have in that case would be not something like that, but something like, well, I'm not quite sure what. I wanted to put it like that, but something rather that wouldn't work. But no, I guess it would have to be, let's see, something like that. They never meet. I didn't draw those quite parallel, but they would never meet, or something like that. So, no, that geometry wouldn't work. You see, just the reasoning as to the nature of the triangle wouldn't allow that. If you start with the concept of a triangle in three-dimensional space, that's where you come out. Now, could you develop a non-Euclidean geometry in which 150 degrees? I don't know, I hesitate there, I defer to any math majors. I think what you'd be doing would be redefining degrees.
Well, if you follow what Kristen is saying, someone could hold a concept of a triangle that was incorrect.
No, they wouldn't be holding a concept of a triangle. They would be supposing something that is false about triangles.
Well, then how does Descartes know that he's not supposing something that's false about God?
Good question. That's where I thought you were going, Kristen. Maybe you were. All right, now, supposing you say that about God, namely, that the essence of God, God is one whose essence is to be good, beautiful, powerful, but not a necessary being. Not a logically necessary being. You see, supposing you say that, what would Descartes respond? That's not God. You see, that's not God. Why not? Well, you see, this may be where Descartes' dependency on the medieval philosophical scheme is something he never escaped. Why does the one who is perfectly good have to be necessary existence? And in the medieval context, it's because at the top of the hierarchy of being, you have the greatest degree of being. And so by definition, the perfectly good is the necessary existence. You see. Now, in which case, Descartes' argument is an argument that's system-dependent, if his concept of God is part of that medieval conceptual scheme. Yeah. So that it wouldn't follow with necessity.
Professor John, two metaphysics, one the hierarchy of being and the other one cause and effect?
Not in this meditation. I don't think he's dealing with cause-effect issues here. His cause-effect argument for the existence of God is in meditation 3. Oh, yeah. Well, if what you're saying is that this is a different argument from the meditation 3 one, very definitely, yes. The meditation 3 is a cause-effect argument. This is not. This is not. Yeah, I prefer Anselm's, because I can see more clearly in terms of the hierarchy of being, how the argument could be claimed to work in that particular philosophical framework. Yet there's something about Descartes which is a much simpler thing, you see. If he can make it stick, that this concept of a necessary being, you see, is there. The objection to it today perhaps highlights the problem. You find the contemporary objection that the existence of God is not logically necessary. Now, it's argued that God is ontologically necessary, that is to say that granted that God exists, he cannot not exist. You see. Granted God exists, his existence is a necessary existence, it's not contingent on anything. You see. But to say that it's logically necessary that God exists, that's tougher. And so some would argue that what he's doing is confusing two kinds of necessity. Logical necessity, ontological necessity.